Rolling here. If you're not a regular of the program, we multi-stream this across a number of different platforms. But of course, the biggest, most important is YouTube, obviously. And we want to make sure that we're live, and it's looking like we are now live. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to yet another episode of Watching the Watchers Live. My name is Robert Gruler. I am a criminal defense attorney here in Scottsdale, Arizona, and we host a program called Watching the Watchers Live because over the course of our time representing many thousands of people facing criminal charges, we've seen a lot of problems in our justice system. I'm talking about misconduct involving the police. We've got issues with prosecutors. We've got malfeasance from judges. We have problems even with politicians and our political system. And so that's what we're going to be talking about today in a very special episode we're calling How to Rig an Election. And this is something that we're going to be doing a deep dive on here throughout the next probably hour, maybe a little bit longer than that. And in specific, what I want to do is focus on a couple questions that I think are most important, stuff that has been sort of lost over the past couple of days in the media. We're going to be asking the question or answering the question of who is involved in this. These are the 5 questions: who, how, when, where, and why. Why was all of this stuff going on? Who's responsible for it, and so on. And so we're going to do a deep dive on that. I've got some different charts and different graphics we want to talk about, specifically about legitimacy and about how this whole thing seems to be unfolding over the coming days and how it may play out in the courts and so on. So once again, let's talk about this. As we're going through the presentation today, take a look at these 5 things: who, how, when, where, and why. We want to be answering those questions. Who was responsible for rigging the election? How did they do it? When did they do it? Where did they do it? And why did they do it? And I'm going to dive into all of those a little bit further. But before we do, I want to talk a little bit about why we're going through this exercise, right? The sort of common notion today is that the election's over. Everything is done and settled. Joe Biden is the next president. And that may be true. The point of this presentation is not to make an argument against that, but it is to have a conversation about this. Now, I want to explain a little bit about why I think this is so important, why I think I have a little bit of a unique skill set to help in this analysis. So as I mentioned at the start of the show, I am a criminal defense lawyer. That means we help people who are charged with crimes, people who come to our office and everybody presumes that they have lost. They're guilty. There's nothing they can do for their case. Many times I've been in front of judges, I've been in front of juries. They've looked at our clients without hearing any evidence, and they've just presumed that they're guilty. That person did it. Obviously, they must have done something or else they wouldn't be here. And so from our perspective as defense lawyers, the deck is sort of stacked against us on everything that we do. As soon as we walk into court, even though there's a presumption of innocence, the jurors never think that. They never look at your client and presume that they're innocent. Most people don't. There are those who do, but by and large, the deck is stacked against us. We have a lot of work that we need to do in order to be creative, in order to win our case. And the way that it traditionally breaks down when you go into court is the prosecutors are following scripts. You know, they have the weight of the government behind them. They have investigators, police officers, papers and mounds of papers about police reports and investigatory documents and so on and so forth. It becomes sort of like a one-sided battle where the defense it's like a David versus Goliath type of a situation, and the defense is on its heels a lot, which is exactly sort of the situation that we find Donald Trump in, right? Everybody is saying he lost. The media is saying across the board, other world leaders are saying it. It's very, very, common knowledge now that the next president of the United States is going to be Joe Biden. But is that really the case? And so this opportunity gives me as a defense lawyer some creative freedom, some ability to go out and have a conversation and play this game a little bit to sort of flesh out a couple potential opportunities here. Is it really over? What does the law say? And if we were going to be rigging an election, what would it look like? Because think about it this way. If you are a defendant, if you're somebody who's on the other side of the law and people think that you've already lost, the prosecutor, they're just going to go through and they're going to follow their script. But the defense has to be creative. We have to think outside the box. We have to say, okay, even though the evidence says that, maybe there's an alternative explanation for this thing. Maybe there's a way that we can sort of finagle around it, find some additional facts, uncover some stones that nobody else turned over, open the box that nobody looked in, and we can find an explanation. We can find an alternative theory for what really went down here. And that's what we're doing today on this program with this whole concept. Now, I don't know if Donald Trump is ultimately going to win the presidency. the point of this presentation is not to convince you or to provide additional evidence to support that. We're just having a conversation about it. We're talking about the legitimacy of our system, about our government. These are very important issues, and we want to break them down a little bit more. So we're going to talk a little bit about what the response is from some of the media and the attempts that are out there to try to stop us from having this conversation, but we're just not going to do that. We're going to keep pushing through, and we're going to talk about all of this stuff because it is important. And this is not a particular endorsement of the president or of Joe Biden, but it is something that I think is worth a conversation. So we are going to do that today. Now, a couple things I want to talk on is this concept that there are two different realities sort of that we find ourselves living in. And you may be experiencing this if you're a Donald Trump supporter, you're in the middle of a chaotic news cycle and you're wondering, is this all authentic? Is this all legitimate? Did Donald Trump really lose this? Because if you're sitting in that camp, you're probably feeling like this is impossible. You see all the support around you. You're looking at the candidate, Joe Biden, and you're thinking, there's no way that that guy beat this president, this Donald Trump. Look at all of his accomplishments and so on. In the other reality, on the other side of the aisle, you're a Joe Biden supporter, and you've been looking at these last 4 years and watching all of the memes about the orange man being bad and all of the problems that you've been witnessing in the country. And so you say, obviously, Donald Trump was thrown out. Obviously, Americans in massive droves went over to Joe Biden and they voted for him in spades. And so you're probably in one of those two camps. And so the idea that you are living in one camp and that maybe the reality in the other camp is true is so foreign to you. It's not even anything that you could comprehend because it's so out of the realm of possibilities. If you're a Joe Biden fan today, everywhere you look, he's confirmed to be the next president, right? And we're going to talk about the legitimacy of those claims here in a minute. But I just wanted to flesh those out so we can all keep in perspective what side of the aisle are we on. And just because you may be on that one side doesn't necessarily mean that you can't think about some alternative arguments. I think some of the most boring people in the world are people who just look at the news and they just read a headline and they say, okay, that must be it. I guess that's all there is to it. They said it on CNN, therefore it must be true. What a boring way to live in my mind. And that's not how we do things as defense attorneys. Every time I get a police report, every time a client comes in, I am initially disbelieving of anything that the government says. We have to be. That's part of our job. And that's part of critical thinking. That's why lawyers exist. That's why people who do, for auditing and all sorts of different things, we're trying to peel the layers of the onions back so that we can dive in a little bit and see what really is going on. How is this all really working? I am not somebody who's just going to read a police report and say, okay, I guess we're going to accept everything in there at face value, just like we're not going to do with this election, especially when they're telling us that we can't talk about it. So let's dive into it now. It's enough of my introduction. I know that was a long one, but let's start talking about some of these concepts. What we want to do now is define legitimacy. Okay, this is a big concept here. This is a political science concept. It's an election concept. It's a legal conflict concept. And we want to talk about it because a lot of what we're seeing here is it's about engaging in what I'm calling the legitimacy war. There's literally a war going on right now. And I've got some clips that I want to show you to break all of this down. But let's understand this concept. What is legitimacy, at least in the political context? And here is a couple blurbs that we pulled out from Wikipedia. You'll see it here. We're talking about legitimacy. It says, in political science, legitimacy is the right and acceptance of an authority, usually a governing law or a regime, whereas authority denotes a specific position in established government. The legitimacy denotes a system of government. Okay, government denotes a sphere of influence. So, an authority, in this case, the next president, who is viewed as legitimate often has the right and the justification to exercise that power. So, political legitimacy, this is from Wikipedia, is considered a basic condition for governing, without which a government will suffer legislative deadlocks and collapse. Okay, legislative deadlocks and collapse if there's no legitimacy. And so what you're seeing here right now playing out before us is a battle over legitimacy. So even though a lot of people in the media are saying that Joe Biden is the next president, we're going to get to some details on why maybe that's not exactly the case just yet. But they're trying to establish legitimacy because if Joe Biden does presume office and he's the next president and half the country thinks he's illegitimate, he may technically be the president, but the country is largely ungovernable, just like it says here. legislative deadlocks and collapse. And so Donald Trump and his team and his side of the country, they're doing the same thing on the other side. They're trying to show why what Joe Biden and many people in the media will call them the Joe Biden camp, why they are illegitimate. And so they're both flailing around trying to show that each other is illegitimate. There's another concept here that was in Wikipedia from John Locke, and it says down here, the Enlightenment era British social philosopher John Locke said that political legitimacy derives from popular, explicit, and implicit consent of the governed. Okay, John Locke, if you don't remember him, many of our founding fathers reference his work in earlier eras to say that he was a major influence for the development of America. John Locke sort of had the idea of life, liberty, and property, which many people will say was ultimately modified to become life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And his hands on the remnants of his political philosophy do carry over into American politics. And so somebody is very sort of renowned as him is saying that it involves the consent of the governed. So the next person who's in the White House, how are they going to govern if half the country doesn't give them consent? If half the country says, you're not my president, right? This was a big critique during the Trump years, which are still going on. A lot of the people on the left were saying he's not my president. And that is a legitimacy problem. But now we're talking about a legitimacy problem on the scale of half the country, not just a small contingent of Democrats who don't like Donald Trump. Instead, this is much, much bigger. And so you'll see here that John Locke says the government is not legitimate unless it is carried on with the consent of the governed. Another German philosopher says that illegitimacy is the foundation of such governmental power as is exercised, or legitimacy is the foundation, and it requires a consciousness on the government's part that it has a right to govern with some recognition by the governed of that right. So they're saying that there's this agreement. It's a consent agreement. It's almost like a social contract. We say you have the authority. We are giving you the authority to govern us, comes from the people, and we're going to give it to you. And they have to take that and to govern with it, and they have to do it in an appropriate way, because if they don't, then the people will refuse to give them additional consent, and the government will become illegitimate and fall out of favor. So we're talking about this right now, this concept. I wanted to just give you some definitional notes here because it is that important. Now, when we apply this to Joe Biden and Donald Trump, let's take a look at how this scale of legitimacy looks, because it right now doesn't look so good for Donald Trump. Now, here it is. This is what I want to talk about. We're going to spend some time breaking this down, and then we're going to go through and we're going to piece together the who, what, when, where, and how this entire election has been sort of feeling like it's getting manipulated in a way that is going to tilt this scale more towards Joe Biden. So here we have it. A couple bullet points that I think are important. Joe Biden has more legitimacy right now because of these things. Number one, the media has called it for Joe. Other politicians have congratulated Joe. We've seen it all around the country. World leaders are congratulating Joe. We've got parties on the street. We've got videos of that. We've got a transition team that has already been started. Kamala Harris took the phone call. We did it, Joe. Remember that? Former presidents are now congratulating Joe Biden. George H.W. Bush did, I think, or George W. Bush did. Twitter and Facebook are calling it. Many people are saying there's no legitimate path. There's no credible challenges here. And there's many, many calls across the country for Donald Trump to concede. So that all looks pretty legitimate, right? If you have ABC, CNN, Fox, all of these different, major media companies saying Joe Biden won this thing. You have world leaders coming out supporting that. Looks pretty legitimate. Looks like the decision's already been done. We call this thinking past the sale. If you go into a car dealership and the car dealer starts talking to you about buying a car and telling you about the features of the car, you may say, that's great, power windows, but you have a conversation about that. What the car dealer does is he tells you how beautiful it's going to feel in your garage and how good you're going to feel taking your kids to the beach in this new, beautiful SUV. He's having a conversation that's past the sale. You've not even bought in the car yet, but you're already thinking about the next steps. And that's what we're seeing here largely in the media right now. The idea that Joe Biden is the next president is everywhere. Every newspaper, every website, world leaders are even saying it. But is he yet? Well, no, he's not. We're going to talk about the Electoral College here in a minute. But they're thinking past the sale. They're talking about the transition. Feels very legitimate. Feels like everybody's on board. But are they yet? We'll see. Donald Trump, by contrast, has very little legitimacy, in large part because we're not talking about much over here right now. We're talking about massive fraud. Okay, what does that mean? We don't really know. We're talking about a stolen election. Still, what is that, right? What do you mean stolen? Looked pretty much like it was, by the book to me. We have an illegal election is what they're saying. They're saying count the legal votes, right? So they're drawing these sort of abstract distinctions between certain things that don't really make a lot of sense. We've got some generic lawsuits saying, people have been denied access to certain things and they're getting refuted. They're even losing some of them. They're not conceding. Many people are saying, oh, he's refusing to concede. And there's some conversations that are taking place about some of his staff and some backbiting in his office. We just saw today that somebody was fired today. I can't remember who it was off the top of my head. And then he's getting some criticism for golfing, right? We saw a lot of that over this weekend, that Donald Trump is just complaining, and there's nothing to even complain about. You lost fair and square, Donald Trump. This is just sour grapes. Maybe you should get together, maybe be a presidential, and just resign peacefully, the peaceful transition of power and all that stuff. And so the legitimacy scale is highly favored towards Joe Biden right now. And we're going to go through and we're going to flesh this out a little bit further. But we want to talk about, some of these assumptions and some of these ideas that are underlying a lot of this. And keep in mind, when we're going through this and we're having a conversation about, how to rig an election or how we would be framing this, I want to frame this from a defense attorney's perspective. And I want to talk about how we would present this case. So in other words, if let's say, for example, that I was representing Donald Trump in his entire campaign, and we needed to present this case to the American public, the American people. And we needed to show them that all of this stuff actually adds up to something that does invalidate the election or change the presumed outcome. Right now, it's presumed that Joe Biden's going to be the next guy. If we needed to make our case, how would we structure that? And what would we be looking at? One of the first things we'd want to have a conversation about is the standard, right? What is the standard of proof that we're talking about? What amount of evidence is going to convince people that maybe this thing is fraudulent, or we need to throw out a certain number of votes or have a revote or whatever it is that the Trump campaign is complaining about? What is the standard? What is the appropriate measure by which we should view that evidence? And we've talked about the burden of proof and the standard of proof several times on this program, but I wanted to just do a quick refresh on what we're talking about here today. So this is typically how it breaks down. We have reasonable suspicion down at the bottom, probable cause down here, preponderance of the evidence right there in the middle, and then clear and convincing evidence, and then beyond a reasonable doubt at the top. So what we're talking about at the very top with beyond a reasonable doubt, this is the standard for criminal cases, okay? Evidence proving a case beyond any doubt that is based in reason. If there is any doubt that is based in reason, then this standard is not met, okay? This is the criminal case standard. It's the highest standard that we have in American law, and it basically says if somebody's on trial and anybody in the jury has any doubt about that person's guilt or innocence, and that doubt is based in reason, it's a reasonable doubt, then that person cannot be convicted of that crime. Okay, you see what that standard is? It's not that high. If somebody's on trial for a DUI, and one juror is looking at the evidence and says, well, those blood results look a little bit questionable because of X, Y, and Z, that's a little doubt. It's based in reason. Maybe there is a legitimate argument about those blood results, and maybe that person genuinely believes that that's something to be concerned about, and that doubt is reasonable. That person cannot be convicted under American law. It's beyond a reasonable doubt. That's the standard. It has to be beyond that. So it's very, very, demanding. In other words, they have to prove without almost any evidence, without any doubt that that person did it in order for that person to be convicted. And so you have to sort of analogize is the word between that and what we're seeing in our country right now. Many people are just presuming, they just want us all to believe that Joe Biden is the next president, but they haven't given us enough evidence beyond a reasonable doubt. And we're going to go through that right now because there are many, many people who think that there's plenty of doubt about the validity of this next election. And certainly the country and the future and the criminal justice policy that is implemented by this next administration is certainly important enough to make sure that we have to abide by the highest standards, right? If you're going to give that same level of requirement to a criminal defendant, we would certainly want to expect that out of our government, out of our federal government. And so that's the standard that we're going to be using. And we just need to ask ourselves, is there doubt about this election? And is that doubt based in reason? If it is, it requires further investigation. We would not convict somebody of a crime why are we going to install the next president of the country for the next 4 years if there's reasonable doubt about it? And of course, there are going to be people who have a lot of doubt about this, but the question is whether it's going to be reasonable. And we're going to talk more and more about the evidence as this show unfolds, and how it may just tip that scale just a little bit more towards legitimacy for Donald Trump. Now, I'm seeing a super chat that just came in from Joshua Leonard. We're going to save all of those. Thank you, Joshua, for that, by the way. We're going to save all of those for the end of the program. This is a live program. So if you have chats, if you have fact checks, if I'm giving you something wrong as the program is unfolding, please send those in the live chat. Miss Faith, who is doing a great job, will clip those, and she'll save those for the end for me. Okay, so one more thing before we get into this. I want to explain that it is okay to be talking about this issue. Okay, everywhere you look today, everybody is saying you can't talk about this. It's already been decided. I've seen a lot of these types of clips that came from this guy, Jeremy Barr, who's a news person who is quoting Jake Tapper over on CNN. And he says this, CNN's Jake Tapper, who says he doesn't normally talk about competitors. He says the Murdochs, or the people at Fox, and the people at Fox have an obligation to put their country above their profits. It is very important that people make it very clear that there is no credible evidence of widespread fraud. Okay, so that's Jake Tapper opining about what Fox News should do, and he's essentially telling Fox News that they should not be talking about this stuff anymore. He wants them to make it known that there is no credible evidence of widespread fraud, right? So that's the talking point that we see all over the place today. No credible evidence about widespread fraud. It's not just Jake Tapper. We're seeing this all over the place. This is everywhere on Donald Trump's Twitter feed. The claim about election fraud is disputed, right? Can't even talk about it. It's been disputed, and we should just take that at face value. And if you do talk about these things, they want to put you on a list. We talked about AOC's tweet last week about her wanting to take all the Trump sycophants and put them on a list. They're still moving forward with that. They've got this organization called the Trump Accountability Project, which is saying they're going to keep and start a list of everybody so they remember what they did. So we have censorship. We have people saying there's no credible evidence. None. No, none. And we have people actually taking names and making lists of people who are talking about these things. All of that is done to chill speech. It's done to stop you from talking about it, which is ridiculous to me. There's nothing, I think, more dangerous than not talking about stuff. Bad ideas survive when people don't refute them by talking about them. Bad ideas take over when nobody challenges them. And so what we're trying to do here on this program is just have a conversation about it. That's all. Okay. It's not fanning flames. It's not promoting conspiracy theories. It's promoting due process. It's following the actual law. Okay. Because the election isn't over yet. The electors have not voted. It's about thinking through America. It's about thinking through how our process works and talking about it. The fact that everybody wants to try to silence this thing is shameful in my mind. It's a shameful part of how this country works, that other people would tell you that you can't talk about this stuff, or that you are not allowed to tweet about it without getting a flag on it. Or if you do talk about it, we're going to put you on a list because we're going to consider you to be a Trump supporter, and there'll be repercussions for Trump supporters. When all we're trying to do is have a conversation about these things. If it's a bad idea, somebody is free to make a video or write an article refuting the bad idea. But when we stop talking about it, that's when these bad ideas are allowed to proliferate, and they become very, very problematic. There's a lot of delegitimizing language going on around the country today. And previously over the weekend, Joe Biden is talking about a nation united, a nation strengthened, a nation healed, the United States of America. I don't particularly feel strengthened or healed right now. I certainly don't think that anybody is united right now. I don't think that is the case at all. Similarly, the transition team says we stand together as one America. Half the country disagrees with that. We will rise stronger than we were before. Even Condoleezza Rice, who's a Republican, is now saying, or was a Republican, I don't know if she still is, she says now, let's come together for the common good with empathy and respect for each other, which are all great things, right? We can all have empathy. We can all have respect. We can all have all of those things. We can all have a nice healed nation, and we want all of those things. There's no question about it. But what this language is doing is it's saying, if you're not in lockstep with them, if you're not a part of the Joe Biden team, if you're not on that train anymore, then you shouldn't be talking about it, because now your language is, it's a divided America. It's America weakened. You're part of not America strengthened. You're part of America weakened if you're not part of this. You are not part of the United States of America. You're part of, Donald Trump's America. We're not stronger. If you disagree with us, you don't have empathy. You don't have respect. If you don't want to come together on this thing, then you're not part of one. You're just, the country's trying to move on. Why can't you just move on with us? What are you doing? And so that is this language. And there's a lot of that going on right now. And a lot of it's being done to mess with your mind and your persuasion abilities, to just say, oh gosh, maybe it is over. Maybe everything's done. Maybe we shouldn't be talking about this, which is sad, because we should be talking about it. The election, by the way, isn't over yet, right? You may have seen this. You may have heard other people talk about it, but here are the actual rules. This comes from the congress.gov website, CRS reports. They've got a nice little breakdown on how the Electoral College works. Let's run through it quickly. On November 3rd, we have the election day, right? General election day for the electors is set by law on 3 U.S.C. Section 1. We have November 3rd is the day of the election. From November 4th to December 14th, then they go through and they count the popular vote. They have a little bit of a safe harbor provision. I think there's another deadline about a week before the 14th. But according to U.S. Code, Section 7, in Title 3, we've got the date in which electors meet and vote in 2020. The meeting is on December 14th. Electoral College delegations meet separately in their respective states and in places designated by their legislature, and so on. They pair all of their votes. They file their certificates of ascertainment that are provided, and they submit them. The 6 certificates are then distributed by registered mail as follows. They send them over to everybody. It's December 14th. That's over a month away. Okay, so there is a lot that is still pending right now, and it is not, like Jake Tapper says, not credible to talk about the idea that the election may ultimately flip. It's not outside the realm of possibility. And there are actually credible people who are talking about it. He may not consider me or this show to be credible, but I'm licensed to practice law in 2 states and the U.S. Supreme Court. So maybe I have more law licenses than Jake Tapper does. I don't know. But I think that there is a potential possibility that this thing changes. Okay, it may not change in a way that Donald Trump becomes the president. That's not what I'm saying. But the election just isn't over yet. And everybody is spiking the ball a little bit prematurely. And there is still a lot of game left to play on this field. So let's take a look at the map. So I took this screenshot from CNN just before we hopped on the program, and here's what it looks like. So you'll see here that they actually pulled Arizona back out, and they've got Georgia still uncalled. They've got North Carolina still uncalled. Alaska still uncalled. They gave Pennsylvania over to Joe. And at this current format, at this current breakdown, what we're seeing here, Joe Biden is only up by 7 electoral votes. If Pennsylvania flips, Pennsylvania is 20 EVs. If that flips, that's it. He's no longer a blue check mark right there. If Georgia ultimately, so they haven't given it to him, but other news sites have, if Georgia flips, that's another 16. Arizona has not even been called yet. They're still counting ballots. And North Carolina, by the way, is still counting ballots until the 12th, until November 12th. So there are still states that are literally counting ballots right now, and they don't have final numbers. And so they've called the election because that's what they really want, and they want you to think past the sale. They want you to start preparing for President Joe, but the election isn't over yet. Now, there are, I think, some pretty credible people, including Justice Alito, who's on the Supreme Court, who have some issues with what's going on in Pennsylvania. And we are going to break down that a little bit further. So once again, here is the scale of legitimacy that we're calling it. And let's talk about Joe Biden's stuff. Let's talk about all this stuff that makes him so legitimate that we're seeing in the media right now. As I said, here is some of what he's posting. So this is Joe Biden. Folks, the people of the nation have spoken, but they haven't really yet. They all voted. Votes are still coming, but that's not done yet. They have delivered us a clear victory, a convincing victory, a victory for we the people, right? That's the first start of this thing. Then we see all these world leaders come out and start congratulating him. We go over here. We've got Boris Johnson. He says, congratulations, Joe and Kamala. We've got this fellow over here, Zelensky from, I don't even know where he's at. Congratulations, Joe. The Ukraine is optimistic about the future. Yeah, remember that? The Ukraine. We talked a lot about that, but most of the media didn't. Emmanuel Macron over in France says, Americans have chosen their president. Congratulations, Joe. And, a big, nice statement. We have a lot to overcome today's challenges. We've got the statement from the Prime Minister of Canada. who, released his statement. So everybody's thrilled. Everybody around the world is thrilled. They're all saying that Joe Biden's the next president, even though our elections aren't quite over. But from a U.S. citizen perspective, that feels pretty legitimate. If the rest of the world is going to be taking this guy on as president, why don't we, right? They're all considering it, so it must be over. It must be done. And it may be. We're going to see. So we also have parties in the streets, right? We saw a lot of this over the weekend on Twitter, everywhere. Everybody's celebrating America's free of the dictator Trump. And people are out there on the streets. It's like COVID just ended. But you can see all these people just gathering together around the country. Right? A lot of people. We got Biden, just going on all over the world, or all over the country. And there's even allegations that this stuff is happening in different parts of the world. We get the phone call from Kamala Harris, just totally unexpected, not scripted, not planned at all. Just gets a surprise phone call from Joe Biden. We did it, Joe.
We did it. We did it, Joe. You're going to be the next president of the United States. We did.
Ugh, yikes. All right. So we have, they're moving on. They've got cabinet nominations that they're making. You can see they're already planning their transition team. This is over from the Politico. Look at all these great people. They're so happy. The country's going to be saved. And folks, by the way, we even know who the dog in the White House is going to be. That's right. Joe Biden has a dog, and he's bringing him to the White House. He's got his pet German Shepherd named Major is now coming to the White House. You type Biden dog in there. Every single article, CNN, the day the dog returns to the White House, New York Times, CBS News, CNN, Washington Post, everybody. Joe Biden's going into the White House and he's bringing his dog with him, right? Thinking past the sale. The election is not over yet. It's until December 14th when the electors have to place their votes. It may be over that day. It may be Joe Biden at that point in time, but we're not there just yet. So hold on to your seats. Now, is there a way for Donald Trump, and this is where we're going to spend the rest of the program talking about, is there a way for him to tip this scale of legitimacy back in his favor? Is there any new evidence that may help tip this scale back over to him, right? And largely what we've been talking about up until this point is evidence that is very speculative. It's very abstract. It's all sorts of, difficult to pin down concepts like, oh, there was a U.S. Postal Service guy who saw something that somebody said and something happened. We went over a lot of this last week. We saw the video from the woman who saw somebody in a Ferrari unload a bunch of ballots. Okay, but who was that? And where were the ballots? And is there any camera footage? And is anybody on record with their name and a signed affidavit saying that they saw this and they're willing to testify about this in a court of law? It's all been very abstract. And the criticism from a lot of the people who are in the Biden campaign are saying, well, there is no evidence. There's nothing to talk about. This is all fraudulent. You're all just making much ado about nothing. When the key claim from the Trump people was, we don't even have access to go gather the evidence. We can't even go into court and see these things, or we can't even go into the ballot tabulation center and get a good count. They won't let us in. So there was a whole flurry of these initial lawsuits that took place last week. And I commented on that and I explained that was necessary, right? Lawyers communicate in lawsuit. That's the language that we speak. So when they're filing lawsuits, that's just part of the ordinary course. Then those lawsuits are going to give them additional access to go get more information that will help them create substantive, coherent legal claims. But until they get that evidence, the lawsuits are going to look pretty skimp. There's not going to be much in there because they don't have much yet. But the investigation is ongoing. There's a lot of time between now and December 14th. And the country is we were focused like this on all these abstract fraud claims, but it's getting a little bit more narrow, okay? From all of these abstract claims, things are tightening in a little bit, and people are really doing some deep dives and some data analysis that might help tip that scale. So let's talk through it. All right, so we've got a lot of the same videos that are poking around. This one was from a woman named Abe Blossom, and she says, a friend just sent me this recording that she got on election night, and we're going to see a pretty quick, pretty obvious change, flipping literally 20,000 votes from Donald Trump to Joe Biden. Now, this was on CNN, so let's take a look and let's watch this.
At the moment, we don't know that, though. At the moment, these are to be decided, and that would push, and again, if you come at this from a Republican...
So it's hard to see the numbers there, but essentially what they're saying is that in one slide, when they're talking about Pennsylvania, it shows Donald Trump at having 1.6 million, 70,000 votes. So they're on Michigan right now. It flips to Pennsylvania right there. Now watch. Okay, so you see that basically it went off the screen and then it flipped. So at the beginning of the video in the screen, you'll see that it was up. Donald Trump was 1.67 million. Biden was 1.27. Then when the screen flipped, literally 19,958 votes flipped. They were given to Trump, they were deleted from Trump, and they went over to Joe Biden. So an interesting coincidence, right? Many people are saying, well, that doesn't mean anything. That proves nothing. That's just a tallying error. That's a human error, but that's data that's happening in real time from the ground level, right? A lot of these news organizations are pulling data from Edison Research or whatever, the AP, they've all got their data sources. And so these are being plugged in real time based on the information that these secretaries of elections are providing. And so that's a pretty interesting thing. Why do 20,000 votes that's a big deal, especially out of Pennsylvania. And so people are seeing this stuff, and it's leading to additional complaints, additional lawsuits, and more specificity. So we have a new election lawsuit that was filed in Detroit. This comes over from Matt Finn, and he's saying here that there was an election fraud lawsuit that was filed in Detroit with affidavits alleging backdating ballots, which is a big problem. No matching signatures. It includes an affidavit from a city employee claiming she was asked to backdate ballots. Okay, now we're talking. Now this is some legitimate claim, right? This is a person who's willing to put their name to it and is willing to sign an affidavit that's going to be filed in court. We didn't have that previously. Previously, we just had random people making videos and posting them on TikTok and Instagram. Now we've got a signed document from a city employee with a specific allegation here, saying that they are asking her to backdate ballots and then waive things that require a matching signature. That's a pretty big deal. Okay, the election law is the election law, and if somebody sends in a ballot after the election day and somebody backdates it, that's an illegal ballot. It's an illegal vote. It's illegal. Okay. Doesn't matter whether somebody wants the vote to count or not, or somebody wants to say, well, that person voted in good faith and we should count their votes. According to the law, the black and white of the election law, it's an illegal vote. Came in after the fact. They actually made it, they fraudulently made it legal by backdating it, but it's still an illegal ballot. All right. This is what the actual affidavit looks like. You can see here. This was filed by a person or signed off on by a person named Jesse Jacob, and he's signing this under oath. Let me move myself out of the way over there. He says, my name is Jesse Jacob. I'm an adult citizen in Michigan. Been an employee for the city of Detroit for decades. I was assigned to work in the elections department from the 2020 election. I've received training at the city of Detroit, so on. I worked at the election headquarters for most of September. I started working at a satellite location for most of October 2020. I processed absentee ballot packages to be sent to voters while I worked at the election headquarters in September 20, and along with 70 to 80 other poll workers. I was instructed by my supervisor to adjust the mailing date of these absentee ballot packages to be dated earlier than they were actually sent. The supervisor was making announcements for all workers to engage in this practice. That's a problem. At the satellite location, I processed voter registrations and issued absentee ballots for people to vote in person at the location. It goes on. I directly observed on a daily basis the city of Detroit election workers and employees coaching and trying to coach voters to vote for Joe Biden and the Democrat Party. I witnessed these workers and employees encouraging voters to do straight Democrat ballot. I witnessed these election workers and employees going over to the voting booths with voters in order to watch them vote and coach for them for whom to vote. During the last 2 weeks while working at the satellite location, I was specifically instructed by my supervisor not to ask for a driver's license or any photo ID when a person was trying to vote. It doesn't stop. It goes on. It says, I observed a large number of people who came to the satellite location to vote in person, but they had already applied for an absentee ballot. These people were allowed to vote in person and were not required to return the mailed absentee ballot or sign an affidavit that the voter lost the mailed absentee ballot. So a person is voting essentially twice. They get to go vote one in person. They get to vote one by their absentee ballot. Whenever I process an absentee voter application or in-person registration, I was instructed to input the person's name, address, date of birth into the qualified voter file system. The QVF system can be accessed and edited by any election processor with proper credentials in the state of Michigan at any time from any location with internet access. I worked at the satellite location until the polls closed on November 3rd and properly completed the entry of all absentee ballots by the QVF by 8:30 p.m. And he goes on. He says, I then reported to process the ballots. I was instructed not to validate any ballots and not to look for any deficiencies in the ballots. He was instructed to that. Absentee ballots that were received in the mail would have the voter's signature on the envelope. When I was at the center, I was instructed not to look for any of the signatures on the absentee ballots. I was instructed not to compare the signature on the absentee ballot with the signature on file. All absentee ballots were required to be inputted into the system by 9 p.m. This required the work to be done in order to have a final list who returned prior to 8 p.m. In order to have enough time to process the ballots, all satellites were instructed to collect the absentee ballots from the drop box every hour on November 3rd. On November 4th, I was then instructed to improperly predate the absentee ballots received on that date were not into the, okay, I was instructed to properly predate the absentee ballots received, I think he's missing a D there, date that were not in the QVF as if they had been received on or before November 3rd. So he's backdating the ballots. I was told to alter the information in the QVF to falsely show they had been received in time. I estimate this was done to thousands of ballots. The information is true. Further affiant says nothing. Jesse Jacobs signs it on the 7th date. He's signing it in front of a public notary. That is concrete evidence. That's legitimate evidence. That's a person now with a name, with a record, somebody who was there, somebody who may have even more information about this stuff, somebody who may have recorded some of this, somebody who can be interviewed, somebody who can be cross-examined. This is legitimate. This is different than what we saw last week. People recording videos and saying, I saw 3 guys with a briefcase. Okay, that's great. But who are you? Where'd you come from? What did you do? Many people last week were using that sort of weak evidence to suddenly come out and say, yeah, all these Trump supporters or anybody even talking about this issue, whether you're a Trump supporter or not, you're illegitimate, you're not credible, nobody believes you, and you should stop talking about this. This is legitimate now. This is a court document signed off by a person and notarized. So presumably there will be more coming there. We move on. We see that the attorneys who are responding to these types of lawsuits are calling it exactly what I am saying they're calling it: conspiracy theories. They're trying to say that we're all a part of the problem because we refuse to just sit down and shut up and not take any of their suppositions as fact. This is from David Fink, who is the lead counsel for the attorney in City Defenders. He says, this is yet another belated lawsuit raising baseless allegations, trying to undermine the confidence in a well-run election. Did that sound baseless to you? Sounded like there was a lot of basis there to me, right? Somebody's working there, literally being instructed by multiple superiors to do things. This person has intimate knowledge of the system. He calls it a QVF, knows exactly how it works, says, this is what the policies and the procedures were. This is what I was doing. They told me to do something different, and I did it. I've got personal knowledge. We've talked about what the personal knowledge standard is here according to the federal rules of evidence, and think he meets that. This attorney goes on. He says, like 2 previous lawsuits, this case is not based upon actual evidence of any election fraud or misconduct. It is based upon various conspiracy theories, which have already been debunked. We are confident that this case and so on will be dismissed. Right? So again, conspiracy theories. That person doesn't sound, what they witnessed doesn't sound like a conspiracy to me. It sounds like first-person, direct-hand knowledge. There's not a conspiracy about who took the cookie out of the cookie jar. This person was sitting there watching somebody come and take a cookie out of the cookie jar. And they say, I identify that person right there. It's not a conspiracy anymore. Now this is an allegation which is moving forward in court. So we've talked a little bit about, the who and the why and all of those different things, but I want to really take a deep dive on to the who a little bit further. So we've talked about some sort of election fraud. We've talked about voter fraud, which are 2 separate and distinct concepts. Let's pause on that real quickly. Voter fraud, when we explained that last week, we talked about voter suppression. We talked about voter fraud. We talked about some procedural problems that may take place in an election. Voter fraud is the idea that voters are voting more than once. Voters are duplicating ballots, or they are falsifying ballots, or they're waiving things, or they're mailing stuff after the deadline. There's all sorts of sort of when the ballots are coming into the election office, any of that process would be voter fraud. But once it has been received by the county, if they're changing numbers, or the voting machines are being hacked, or something is happening with the data on the back end that doesn't really involve the voters, in other words, the voters aren't a part of the fraud, then that's called election fraud. It's the election people who are doing it, or it's somebody who's involved in that separate component. So anything coming up, anything the voters are doing up until the delivery of the ballots would technically be voter fraud. But anything that's happening in the ballot office, or where they're actually collecting and processing these things, that's going to be election fraud. All right, so now let's talk about the who a little bit. Anytime that you're charged with a crime, right? A defendant has been charged with a DUI, or let's use the theft example. Okay, somebody's being charged with a crime for stealing somebody's purse. right? The person who's being charged with that crime, it's very difficult for them to say, I didn't do it. That's it. I didn't do it. Or to claim somebody else did it. Say, I didn't steal that purse. Someone else did it. Okay. If you take that case in front of a court of law, in front of a jury, in front of a judge, they're going to say, okay, that's great that you didn't do it, but who did do it? Right. So as a defense lawyer, you need to think about an alternative explanation. What is a reason that we can give to the court that is going to be viable, that somebody's going to look at and they're going to say, that's a pretty good explanation. That's going to show that your client didn't actually rob that bank or steal that purse. Somebody else did. So the cases that are sort of I would say the least successful are the ones where you have no alternative story. If a defense attorney just brings their client into court and they say, I didn't do it, and their whole defense is, I didn't do it, it's kind of a weak case because the jury wants to know, okay, well, if you didn't do it, then who did it? Because they don't want to let the person in the chair go free if they did it. So you have to find an alternative explanation. And it's not necessarily that they did it. It could be that somebody else did it and we don't know who it is. And here's enough evidence as to why. And this is why there's not enough evidence to prove our client guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. All right. So when we're talking about that, that's what the Trump side needs. That's what the Trump campaign needs. Who is the person behind this big conspiracy? Who is responsible for rigging this election? Okay, they're saying that, but it needs to be a little bit more concrete than the Democrats. Okay, because there's a lot of Democrats and there's a lot of different types of Democrats. And if you say the Democrats are responsible for everything, then they're kind of responsible for nothing because you can't go and find who actually did it, right? I have a good friend who's a Democrat. He didn't do any voter fraud. He's not responsible for any of this stuff. He's just a nice old man who sits at home and watches CNN and votes. But he's not involved in election fraud or voter fraud. So this idea that the Trump campaign or the Republicans can go out there and just say that Democrats are responsible for this and they're the ones who incited this voter fraud, it's not a winning argument. It may be true that some Democrats, a small subset of the population, is involved in this, but you need to be a little bit more specific. And so I want to dial in a little bit on the who. We spent a lot of time talking about rigging elections with the how and some of the voting numbers that we have seen off. We've talked about the delivery of ballots and those types of things. But let's spend a little more time on the who. All right. So if you are a conservative, if you're a Republican, you probably know that there are all these different groups that sort of exist. And the liberals know about the conservative groups as well. Both political parties do this. Essentially, what you can do is form these organizations that are political parties or political PACs, and they have a lot of influence. They raise a lot of money. They get money from all of the big donors around the country, and they go and they implement their agenda. And so when we're thinking about this rigging the election, who could potentially be responsible for this thing? Beyond just the Democrats, who else? Can we dial this down a little bit further? It's difficult to say that it's the county attorneys or the county elections or the state supervisors or the secretaries of state. Is there anybody else? And does the law give us any inkling or any little breadcrumbs that we can follow to figure some of this out? I want to talk about one group called Priorities USA. Okay, this is a big left-wing group. It's big. They've got priorities.org. And here is a screenshot from their website. It says, winning in 2020 and beyond. The only way to take on Donald Trump and his agenda is to vote him out of office and elect a Democratic candidate for president. Until they are defeated, Trump and his Republican allies and states will attempt to implement their agenda, gutting health care, putting the interests of millionaires above average Americans, attacking the fundamental rights of immigrants, women, and people of color. That's why Priorities USA is working tirelessly to persuade and mobilize voters in order to take back the White House, and so on and so forth. Okay, Priorities. Priorities USA. I'm sure you've heard about them. Very big. Well, why am I talking about Priorities USA? It's because they support a number of other groups. So think about it this way. You've got one hub and you've got a number of these other little groups that are floating around. One of those groups we've talked about previously. It's called the Alliance for Retired Americans. And I want to show you this screenshot from their website. It says here, the Alliance. So before I switch over, we've covered this group repeatedly on this channel, the Alliance for Retired Americans. They were responsible for initiating a number of different lawsuits surrounding the election. And there was a lawsuit in Pennsylvania that they were a part of that came down in their favor. And they posted about it on their website. And so in this post, this is a screenshot from a post that they're celebrating their legal victory. And here's what they say. They say the Alliance for Retired Americans, working with its state chapters, has filed lawsuits to protect vote by mail and absentee voters in Florida, Maine, Michigan, Minnesota, North Carolina, Texas, Wisconsin, in addition to Pennsylvania. Okay, so that's a lot of lawsuits, and that is the Alliance for Retired Americans. Now, what does this look like, practically speaking? Here's what we've got. Here is Priorities USA at the very top. This is feeding into the Alliance for Retired Americans, and the Alliance for Retired Americans, by their own website, by their own admissions, is filing lawsuits in all of these various states: Florida, Massachusetts, Michigan, Minnesota, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Texas, and Wisconsin. The only one that really doesn't stand out there is Maine. Maine typically goes blue, I think, right? Michigan, battleground. Minnesota was close. North Carolina, battleground. Pennsylvania, battleground. They thought they were actually going to win Texas. They didn't. Wisconsin, battleground. Florida, battleground. Okay? All battleground states. Priorities USA says that they are a part of, or the Alliance for Retired Americans says that they're a part of Priorities USA. And let's take a look at what that looks like. Here you can see it. In addition to them filing those lawsuits, they said this lawsuit is supported by Priorities USA. Okay, so all of these lawsuits were being funneled by Priorities USA. So lots of money going in. Then they're filing lawsuits in all of the battleground states. So that's a good place to start. Who's funding these things? Now there's a name. It's called the Alliance for Retired Americans. Now we can say, by their own admissions, they're responsible for going into different states and filing lawsuits. They're responsible for these moving court dates, for all of this election mayhem. They were the ones who started it, right? That's what the Donald Trump campaign, and that's what the people on that side of the aisle can lay their teeth into. And now, rather than it being about Democrats or some abstract concept of who the big villain is in this whole thing, there's some pretty concrete evidence about this stuff. And we've talked about it on the channel. You can go and look up those lawsuits. Many of these lawsuits were being filed back in June, some even earlier than that. So they were implementing this stuff a long time ago. The response by the Trump administration is reactionary, but these people were planning it, and they were filing lawsuits in multiple states a long, long time ago. And there's records of that. You can actually follow it. The next who that is interesting, we're learning a lot more about as this continues to unfold, is the Dominion voting systems. Okay, Miss Faith did some deep dive on this today. She found here that Dominion voting systems, you can see here, it's run by, this fellow here was one of the founders. His name is John Poulos. Dominion Voting Systems, it's a corporation, sells electronic voting hardware and software, including voting machines in the U.S. And when we learn a little bit about him, we learn that this fellow has ties to the Clinton Foundation. Isn't that interesting? The company has used lobbying firms. They employ major lobbyists. Major figures includes Georgia's Republican governor, includes House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. There's a lobbyist who donated to a Republican majority Mitch McConnell. We've got, during the increased scrutiny, we've got, they're finding ties to George Soros, Robert Mueller. Some of the components, they come from China. President Barack Obama sits on the board of a company that it acquired in 2018. So this company that runs the elections is just interwoven with all of these major public figures. Isn't that interesting? The company's equipment is used in North Carolina, Nevada, Georgia, Michigan, Arizona, Pennsylvania, and all the states where there are concerns about votes being counted, right? So that's concerning, right? That type of stuff is more concrete. We have somebody now who might be responsible for it. So rather than it just being an abstract Democratic Party, now it's okay. Now it's voting, maybe. Isn't that interesting? Now it's the Retired Alliance for, the Alliance of Retired People, right? Which is funded by Priorities. Lots going on there. And now we're starting to add some meatballs into this plate of spaghetti. We have another tweet over here about Dominion software. This comes from Daniel Chaitin. He says, Michael Flynn lawyer Sidney Powell says computer system glitches is where the fraud took place, claiming they stole targeted votes not only from Republicans, but also liberals like Bernie Sanders in the primary. She and Maria Bartiromo, they focus on the Dominion voting systems.
Welcome back. I'm back with Sidney Powell, who is part of President Trump's legal team in contesting this election. Sidney, we talked about the Dominion software. I know that there were voting irregularities. Tell me about that.
That's to put it mildly. The computer glitches could not and should not have happened in at all. That is where the fraud took place, where they were flipping votes in the computer system or adding votes that did not exist. We need an audit of all of the computer systems that played any role in this fraud whatsoever. And, you know, Joe Biden had it right. He said that he had the biggest voter fraud organization ever, and he didn't need people's votes now. He would need people later. They had this all planned, Maria. They had the algorithms. They had the paper ballots waiting to be inserted if and when needed. And notably, President Trump's vote in the blue states went up enormously. That's when they had to stop the vote count and go in and replace votes for Biden and take away Trump votes.
I've never seen voting machines stop in the middle of an election, stop down and assess the situation. I also see reports that Nancy Pelosi's longtime chief of staff is a key executive at that company. Richard Blum, Senator Feinstein's husband, significant shareholder of the company. What can you tell us about the interest on the other side of this Dominion software?
Well, obviously, they have invested in it for their own reasons and are using it to commit this fraud to steal votes. I think they've even stolen them from other Democrats in their own party who should be outraged about this also. Bernie Sanders might very well have been the Democratic candidate, but they've stolen against whoever they wanted to steal it from.
Yeah, you know, it's an interesting point, right? You would think that Democrats would be very upset about this. I made this point before the election. The idea that Joe Biden and all of his Hunter Biden baggage and all of that stuff that has been the subject of sort of a whitewashing cover-up for a long time, you would think that a lot of the Democrats that were Bernie Sanders supporters or Andrew Yang supporters or Tulsi Gabbard supporters would be looking at this going, these Democrats, they knew that Joe Biden had this baggage and they still made him our nominee anyways. We could have had a good, you know, legitimate, fresh face for the Democratic Party, but they sort of weaseled this way through. And you would imagine that anybody, anywhere, right? If the Republicans were doing this, if Donald Trump's people were doing it, you would imagine that they would also be upset about it. You would expect the same sort of concern out of the Democrats, but we just don't see a lot of that. Now, a lot of people are diving into this stuff. And so, you know, a lot of this information I have not personally vetted. That's fine. This is a YouTube channel. We're not in the Supreme Court. So, you know, I can sort of play with these ideas, and I would rely on people to fact check this stuff. And a lot of this, I think, is going to come out over the coming days because there's a lot of time to do that. And, you know, the people who are demanding answers the day after the election, it's too soon. Everybody needs to pump the brakes a little bit because now you are seeing just a convergence of all sorts of you know, efforts from different people around the country trying to unravel this thing. And we're starting to see some actual progress being made. So this is another tweet. Kyle Becker is over on Twitter at Kyle N.A. Becker. He says, the Clinton Global Initiative is tied to the Dominion voting systems through the Delian Project. The Delian League was an Athenian-led alliance to liberate the Greek city-states from Persian domination. Dominion, the Delian Project, the left's motives are right in our face, and so Ms. Faith found this on the Clinton Global Initiative website. The Delian Project, Democracy Through Technology. In 2014, Dominion Voting committed to providing emerging and post-conflict democracies with access to voting stuff. Over the next 3 years, Dominion Voting will support election technology pilots with donated automated voting machines, providing an improved electoral process and therefore safer elections. And so, you know, a lot of this stuff is being implemented through technology, and there's this web of different people involved in all of these different technologies. And a lot of these people who are involved in it are the politicians themselves. So wouldn't you think that that would be called a conflict of interest? I would imagine it would be. But the Congress people, they don't want to pass rules for themselves. They only want to pass rules for you and I. In Arizona, we have a representative by the name of Paul Gosar, who is very upset, very vocal about some of this stuff. Want to play a little clip from him because he's saying that, you know, these election results are very skewed, and this is an elected representative. So, you know, when Jake Tapper says there's nobody with no credibility, this guy has some credibility. He's got enough to get elected here in the state of Arizona. So let's listen to what he has to say.
And do you have to believe that there may be some issue with the software? What are you thinking right now?
So what ends up happening in Michigan is that they saw this algorithm go into effect where it actually flipped Republican votes into Democrat votes, and it was a turn of 6,000 votes in just that area. So once again, software, if it has a glitch like that, it's very troubling because it's very possible that it's in every software package that they actually put out. And so this is this same software is throughout Georgia. It was rejected in Texas. It's in Arizona's Maricopa County, only in Maricopa County, by the way, and only in Clark County in Nevada. So it's also in New Mexico. It's also in Colorado. It's also in Illinois. So there's a number of states here that employ it, and they're hardly fans of Donald Trump. So, if this is a short exercise and a very cheap exercise to get the American public back that our elections aren't grounded in Russia or anybody else is, influence.
Yeah, and Paul Gosar apparently just got reelected here, so the voting software worked for him. All right, so the last thing, or a couple other things I want to touch on before you jump into the chat. So, as Paul Gosar said, Texas did get rid of this stuff. They don't use Dominion in their election, and they didn't for 2020. Here's what they had to say about it. Findings. The following are findings based on written evidence submitted by the vendor in support of this application. The examiner reports identified multiple hardware and software issues that preclude the office of the Texas Secretary of State from determining that the Democracy Suite satisfied each of the voting system requirements set forth in the Texas Election Code. Specifically, the reports raise concern about whether the suite is suitable for its intended purpose, operates efficiently and accurately, and is safe from fraudulent or unauthorized manipulation. Therefore, Democracy Suite do not meet the standards, and we're denying them. I hereby deny certification by Joe A. Esparza, the Deputy Secretary of State. That was done on the 24th of January in 2020. So, they did an analysis on it. They said it was bad. Other states, for some reason, said it was good, and they took that in, even though there are some pretty major findings that this stuff is not particularly secure. And that's just, I think, the beginning of this. So we'll see where that goes. Now, the other thing I wanted to talk about was some of the reaction to this. Donald Trump is still being censored on Twitter. Miss Faith found this count, says here that tech companies censor Trump more than Biden. No kidding. Times Biden has been censored is 0. The times Donald Trump has been censored 111 times. 111 times. The president of the country. Wild. All right. There has been no violence. Donald Trump is noting that there's no violence. Fox cuts off the press secretary. Fox News cuts away from the Trump campaign press secretary right now. Can and good countenance continue to show this. Says Democrats are welcoming fraud and welcoming illegal voting. So they actually cut her off.
One party in America that opposes verifying signatures, citizenship, residency, eligibility. There is only one party in America trying to keep observers out of the count room. And that party, my friends, is the Democrat Party. You don't take these positions because you want an honest election. You don't oppose an audit of the vote because you want an accurate count. You don't oppose our efforts at sunlight and transparency because you have nothing to hide. You take these positions because you are welcoming fraud and you are welcoming illegal voting. Our position is clear. We want to protect the franchise of the American people. We want an honest, accurate, lawful count. We want maximum sunlight. We want maximum transparency. We want every legal vote to be counted, and we want every illegal vote to be...
I just think we have to be very clear. She's charging, the other side is welcoming fraud and welcoming illegal voting. Unless she has more details to back that up, I can't in good countenance continue showing you this. I want to make sure that maybe they do have something to back that up, but that's an explosive charge to make, that the other side is effectively rigging and cheating. If she does bring proof of that, of course, we'll take you back. So far, she has started saying right at the outset, welcoming fraud, welcoming illegal voting. Not so fast. We'll have more after this.
Okay, well, now we're seeing that, right? Neil Cavuto says not so fast, but we just showed you a document on this channel of somebody with an affidavit saying that they saw it. Their bosses were telling them to do it. It's signed. It's presumably been filed in court, and I think there's going to be a lot more of that. So that's why we're going to continue to follow this. Now, there is a lot more to dive into on this. I wrote an outline over the weekend for all the things that I wanted to cover, and it's way too much to squeeze into one show. So we're going to leave it there for today, and I'm going to jump into the super chats. We got some super chats that I need to get to, and then we'll jump into the live chat. So let me just pause right there. and welcome everybody to the live chat. So we have Ma the Fox, who's here doing a great job. We got Miss Faith, who's right back in there, who is moderating the chat. They do a great job. So let's all say hello and thank you to them. All right, so the super chats that were coming in as the program was unfolding. First one is from Joshua Leonard for a big 15. Thanks, Joshua Leonard. Very, very nice of you. He says, if this goes to the House delegation, do you think if the Republicans, have the what to choose Trump, then we'll find out which of them truly serve us? I don't think so, quite frankly. I don't think that the Republicans have the stomach for this stuff. I don't think that they're any good at it. I was thinking about the two sides of the team, the two teams, I would say, on each side, and the Democrats are just killers is what it comes to. If this was a sporting game, I would not bet on the Republicans. The Democrats are very, very good at this stuff, and they're very ruthless in a lot of ways that the Republicans just aren't. And you can see this just taking a look at some of their, I would say, some of the biggest names in their party. Okay, it's people like AOC, like Ilhan Omar. It's like, Linda Sarsour and some of these people who are just out to win constantly. And they take their criticism, they take the flack, and it just right off the back, water off a duck's back. They just keep going and going and going. And the Republicans don't really have anybody like that. We have a lot of go along, get along individuals who are part of the Republican caucus, and they just do whatever the Republicans want to do. They want to be civil. They want to be cordial. They want to be better than that. They want to be like these Fox News guys, like Neil Cavuto, who says, oh gosh, you can't claim that they're rigging things. There's no evidence of that. Well, there actually is. There's plenty of evidence. If you wanted to look around, you'd find it. But they want to be part of that oligarchy. They want to be part of that upper ruling class. And so that requires them to be part of that, right? They can't go out there and even question these things. Megyn Kelly, to her credit, all this weekend has been on fire on Twitter. If you're not following Megyn Kelly, she's somebody who's sort of part of that media establishment who is not buying into the same narrative. And it's interesting that you can see them. They stand out like a sore thumb because everybody else is rowing the same direction. Anybody who's coming out and basically saying, hey, maybe there's something we should talk about here, everybody who does that is sort of standing out right now, and they're getting criticized, as am I on this channel. But that's all right. We'll keep going. All right. We have another super chat over from Killer Mouse 63. He says, both sides should want the truth, no matter where the truth leads us. Love your content. You do a great job overall. Glad I found your channel. Thank you very much, Killer Mouse 63. I appreciate that. A lot of this type of content, a lot of these conversations are new for me. My day job is being a criminal defense lawyer and running a law firm here in Arizona. And so me sort of commenting on these things is a little bit of a, it's a little bit kind of pushing the comfort zone a little bit. So I appreciate that positive feedback. We're having a good time. And I think these issues are important. I mean, this is not just an entertainment show, right? This is something where we think these conversations are important, and we want more people to be thinking critically about their lives and about how the government is working around them, because there are a lot of problems with the people in our governments, and they just kind of go overlooked because people give them a pass. And we think that the better way to improve our society is to demand more of our government officials. If we're talking about criminal justice reform, it starts with our politicians. And so we want to make sure that the people who are going to be passing the laws that we all have to live by, we want to make sure that they're being held accountable. And so I appreciate that. I'm certainly with you. If the Republicans were doing this, if Donald Trump won and there was Benford's law analysis of his data that looked really bad and he was fraudulently falsifying all of the election results, I'd be the first one on this channel claiming that he should be thrown out of office. So I would just expect that, everybody would want that, but apparently that is not the case. We have Kenneth Fielder with a big super chat. He says, what about those miscounted ballots via computers in Michigan? Yeah. And so we talked a lot about that last week. We did a deep dive into Antrim, the county Antrim. That I think that's Michigan, right? That was in Michigan. And there was a number of votes, I think about 5,500 or 6,000 votes that actually flipped. And over the weekend, they told us that was all computer error, right? Antrim County in Michigan is one of these counties that goes red all the time. And so when it went blue, they started looking at the data. They looked at the numbers and they were thinking, how the heck? Because last election, this went like 80% to the Republicans. How did this flip? They did a recount. Oh yeah, that's right. About 5,500 votes were accidentally given to Biden instead of Trump. And they're blaming that on a clerical error, right? So the technology's perfect. Technology's flawless. We heard from everybody, there is nothing to complain about. It's all good. Except when it isn't. And when it isn't, they don't want to delegitimize the election. Think about this. Can any elected politician, can anybody in office come out and acknowledge that the election may have been rigged? What if they do that? That almost delegitimizes the entire system. You realize how catastrophic that might be? What if all of these elected people have been cheating for the last 4 years or 10 years, and we're just now going to catch it? Do you think that any one of these people are going to come out and admit it to you? Hey, yeah, I know I've been the governor for 4.5 years, this is my second term as governor. But by the way, the reason I got elected is because our election systems are totally fraudulent. I had no idea. Sorry. Do you think anybody's going to do that? So no, all of the politicians, they have to beat the drum. They have to go on the same talking points. This is all legitimate. This is all okay. Because if they come out and say otherwise, they're undermining their own legitimacy claim to power. They can't do it. So they won't do it. And so it's up to other people to have the conversations and to keep the pressure on. And quite frankly, I think Donald Trump might be the only politician living today who would bring this fight, which is why it's so interesting that he happens to be the president. I think many other politicians would never even venture there, but Donald Trump will. It's going to be interesting to follow along. We got a super chat from Charles Reed, says, Kayleigh McEnany tonight, did you see it? Yeah, zero mainstream media. I did not see it other than the clip that we just played. I am going to watch it. I don't know what the basis of her press conference was because it's being censored all over the place, but I am going to go take a look at it later. Thank you, Charles Reed, for the super chat. We have Michael Hanna here who says, software engineer. He says, my belief is that fraudsters had a predetermined target vote count range by software, and to get that vote count, they needed a massive number of voters to create that figure that appears on the screen. Okay. So yeah. So, I mean, we talked about this last week as well. We talked about this chain of custody, right? So how it goes from the election department to the voter, back through the mail, back into the U.S. Postal Service, back over to the county board. We sort of went through this progression and we're able to see what that looks like. And there are a lot of opportunities to sort of inject and to break that chain of custody. And what we talked about last week was that if the U.S. Postal Service doesn't know how much is coming in and how much is going out, then that's a perfect insertion point. You could just come right in, deliver a bunch of pre-filled out ballots that have no particular voter that they're connected to. You could just insert them into the U.S. Postal Service at that juncture, and that would throw off the votes. And so, this Michael Hanna says he's a computer engineer. So I kind of that mindset that it felt like to me after election night. So after all of the polls, technically closed and things were still being counted and some of the extensions were taking place, they were able to see the difference. So in some of these jurisdictions, and we saw that literally as the night was going on, as we were seeing the live stream, when we ended the live stream, Donald Trump was up. Most of the polls were closed. And throughout the night, there was a slow sort of injection of these votes that were going on. And then we woke up the next morning and a lot of the states flipped. It all happened sort of in the dead of night, early morning. And it felt like to me, like they knew what the baseline was. Okay, polls closed, Trump's up by 20,000 votes. We got to close the gap. How do we do that? And then after hours, we woke up, all of the votes were made up and all of the states started to flip, and it just kept going on up to this day. It's still going on. Okay, Elias Diaz says, do you think that half the country really hasn't accepted the results? I'm starting to feel like I'm taking crazy pills, even entertaining the fact that the election might be fraudulent. So do you really think that half the country hasn't accepted the results? No, I think that probably most people have accepted the results, I think at this point. Keep in mind, you and I are political junkies. You're on this channel because you like this type of commentary and you like thinking about these things. Most people, though, they don't, right? Most people don't really think about this stuff in depth to the extent that we do. They look at the news, they say, oh, I guess Biden won. He's going to be the next president. That's great. I voted for him. Cool. Trump rubbed me the wrong way. Glad he's going to be gone. That's kind of the extent of it. So for many of those people, I think they've accepted it. I think a lot of the sort of the non-political, apolitical, even Trump supporters may be kind of accepting it. I think my sort of gut feeling on them is that they have a lot of uncertainty over it. They feel sort of in their being, which I feel. I'm still shocked that Arizona went to Joe Biden. Quite frankly, I've lived here my whole life. I know the state very well. I'm surprised that it went for him. I'm not surprised that it went for Mark Kelly. Mark Kelly versus Martha McSally, no brainer. I thought for sure Mark Kelly was going to beat her because she's not a particularly good candidate. She's lost 2 Senate seats here now. We kind of knew after the first one she's not any good, and they put her up anyways. So that was a miss for the Republicans in Arizona. But we all still kind of knew Martha McSally was kind of a meh candidate. Mark Kelly, kind of a home run guy, right? Astronaut, all these great credentials, married to Gabby Giffords down in Tucson. Like, we knew he was going to win, but the same feeling was not there for Joe Biden. Joe Biden was going to get blown out because there's Trump support everywhere. People still wearing hats and masks with Trump's symbol on it. So, the idea that they're going to accept this is, I think, unlikely. So that's for Elias. Yeah. I think that there's no question that there was some fraud in the election. The other point that I wanted to make on the fraud thing was that people talk a lot about this widespread fraud, right? That was another point that Jake Tapper made, saying that widespread fraud, there's no evidence of it. You don't even need widespread fraud. We're talking about like 100,000 votes would be the difference. You just need very, very tiny, minimal minutia fraud. If you can go in and pick certain counties and flip those counties or inject a certain number of ballots to close the gap. If you only need to close the gap by 5,000, 10,000 votes, you don't need that many votes. So we're not talking about 1 million votes in 30 states. We're talking about a couple, tens of thousands of votes in just a few handful of states. That's all you need. So they want to change the argument. They want to move the goalpost a little bit. They want to say it has to be widespread. There's no credible evidence. Neither one of those is true. There's plenty of credible evidence. I just gave you some today. I also have made the point repeatedly, it doesn't need to be widespread. Very targeted, very focused fraud, I think, is all that you would need. Gigi's in the house. He says, hey, Rob, with regards to the Fox News claim, do you think they're just trying to keep people calm and tell them to wait for the actual facts? That's a good question. I don't think that. I think that Fox News is as malicious as the rest of the media. I think that they have an agenda just like everybody else in the media does. And I think we should just acknowledge that, right? I have my own opinions. I try to be objective, but those of you who watch regularly, you know how I lean on these things, right? We can't hide it. I don't try to hide it. I tell you what I think, and then I will also argue the opposing side because it's good practice. It's good things for attorneys to do. It's good things for all of us to do. If you look at a problem, if you look at a certain set of facts and you just analyze that and you only think there's one explanation for that, you're doing yourself a disservice. There's usually a number of explanations for it. So when you're analyzing something, if you're saying, who won the presidential election? Let me check what CNN tells me. And you go to CNN and they tell you and you say, great, that's it. Okay, that's one way to live, but that's not how I like to live. I like to live with a little bit more analysis, and I don't like other people programming my opinions. I want to think through this stuff, and I want to look through the data on my own. That's what a responsible person who's a good citizen, who's an active, involved person in society, that's what they do. They think about these things. That's what the founding fathers did. That's what good government does, is we think and we work through these issues. To just accept anything at face value, it seems to me like a very boring way to live, and it's not particularly useful. We do not want a country of sheep who just accept whatever the news people tell them. So we're going to think into it a little bit further. Now, I think that Fox News, Gigi, and a lot of these news sources, they literally are trying to program your opinions, and we've heard them say that specifically, even, right? You can't talk about those things because we don't allow them to be talked about. I forget what that was. Somebody was saying something. I think it was Cuomo. Didn't he have a quote somewhere where he was talking about the Edward Snowden documents, and he said, you can't even look at those, they're illegal. No, they're not. Or it was the WikiLeaks document during the Clinton campaign, right? They told us we couldn't even look at the WikiLeaks document because it's illegal. No, it's not. They're lying to you, but they're trying to control your opinion. All right. Zulu says, hi, Faith. You're killing me, Rob. Interesting walkthrough, though, after I prepared my psyche. LOL. Love you guys. Thanks, Zulu. So Zulu has been around for a long time, and I posted we posted the thumbnail, how to rig an election, in our Discord channel, which is it's a chat room that you can join before or after the show. So even though you're chatting here live on the YouTube channel, before the show, right, there's no video going, so there's nowhere to chat. So we chat over in Discord, and the link's in our description. And so I posted that in our Discord. And Zulu, I could see, as soon as I posted it, I could see who's typing, and Zulu Zeit's down there just typing furiously. And I said, just say it, Zulu. And I know what's coming. Just say it. And he said, okay, good headline. So kind of funny. Thanks for being here, Zulu. Thanks for the super chat. Love you back. USA Libertarian says, never concede under any circumstances. That comes from Hillary Clinton. Hillary Clinton said that, right? A lot of the people before the election said, Joe, you're going to win no matter what. Don't concede. Don't concede. Don't concede. Start transitioning. Accept it, right? Almost like fake it until you make it. If you keep faking it, eventually they're going to give it to you. But we're just not there yet. Now, keep in mind, we could get there. We could get to the December 14th, Supreme Court, Judge Alito. They look at the Pennsylvania case. They say, nope, Pennsylvania's going to stay. That's not flipping. if that's out, that's kind of the game there. It's 20 votes. We talked a lot about this on Friday, but we're going to see. The point is there's still time left in the game, and we're going to play it out. So we're going to keep going on this channel. We got Ty Shane, who says they might do a fake terrorist attack to blame Trump. Got to start telling our side to disavow. That's their nuclear option to get Trump to concede. Ooh, I hope that doesn't happen. I certainly hope that doesn't happen. We don't want any more. We don't want any bloodshed. We don't want any riots on the street. I don't even particularly want Donald Trump supporters to go and protest, right? Like I think that these protests are, I don't know how helpful they are, quite frankly, but we should be having conversations about it. The best way to beat back a bad idea is with a good idea. The best way to refute something that you think is dangerous is by refuting it, by conversing about it, by talking about it. And that's what we're going to do here. So hopefully it doesn't result to that, Ty Shane, but thank you so much for the super chat. I appreciate that. We have Joshua Leonard also with the super chat. A lot of those coming in today, everybody. Thank you so much for those. He said, did you see that Pfizer is releasing a vaccine and it was available November 9th? It was withheld and they also donated to Biden and the Democrats hundreds of thousands of dollars. So I did see that. I saw that from Pfizer and I thought that was very interesting, right? Why didn't they make that announcement 2 weeks ago? Right? They probably knew 2 weeks ago how this was going to go. I'd guess that they didn't get the results on November 8th yesterday and then make a public statement. By the way, we got this great vaccine. It's ready to go. They waited until after the election. Was that deliberate? Maybe. Maybe not. I don't know. Maybe they did do it that way. Maybe they did finally get it and they're telling us now about it. But it certainly feels like it's a little bit planned. And certainly, stuff like that can sway the election. If they had released this 2 weeks ago, maybe Donald Trump wins. And maybe by holding off on it, it hurts his campaign more than it helps. I haven't looked into any of the donations or any of that stuff, but it doesn't surprise me. I mean, there's just a web of these people. And you can call it conspiracy theory if you want, or you can just go look up the documents yourself and you can make these connections on your own. You don't need to be a lawyer to go figure this stuff out. Just throw it into Google. You can look at the Retired Alliance people. Right on their website. It says this was all funded by Priorities USA, and they actually tell you the different lawsuits that they filed, and we went through the lawsuits and looked at them. And they were trying to move election days. They were trying to waive signature requirements. Why do you do that stuff if not to manipulate or open up some opportunities to manipulate an election? So very good question. All right. I think that's it for the super chats. So let's go back on over to the live chat. Let's see here. Chosen Juan says, what happened to Alaska and North Carolina? So North Carolina is still counting votes. They have until the 12th. So that'll be next week. No, that'll be 3 days from now. What is that, Thursday? So that we'll know. North Carolina has told us they're going to stop counting votes until the 12th, which is when their deadline was extended to. So we'll see what happens then. We have another super chat. R&R, great work. Keep it up. Faith does an amazing job. Thank you, guys. That's from S. McKay. Thanks, S. McKay. Appreciate that. And Faith does do a great job. The show would not be possible without her. Okay. Let's see what else. We have Antonio. He says, would you say that affidavits constitute evidence? Many on this chat have tried to deny it. Please watch Trump's legal team press conferences have said that they have many affidavits, 50 to 60 plus in Pennsylvania. Yeah, an affidavit is perfect evidence. It's good evidence, right? It's an indication that a person is going to come into court and testify about something. So the document itself is not like evidence. You can't submit that to a jury, but you could. A person could be called into court to testify. So oftentimes that's all the evidence that you need is somebody's personal testimony. Okay. So, let's say for example, that, you hit somebody, right? Well, that's not a good case because if you're physically injured, then that counts. That's all you need, at least in Arizona. But let's say, if there's another crime and something happened, then if somebody observed that crime happened, that might be the only evidence, right? You may not have been recorded. You may not have made text messages. You may not have sent emails. There may not be video camera or body camera. Only a person is testifying about what they saw. They're saying, I saw that person steal that candy bar. That's it. There may be no surveillance footage or evidence or affidavits or anything. A person just saying, I was there, I saw it. It's personal knowledge. They are a witness, and that's evidence in a case. So I think these affidavits are actually significant. All right. Salt and Peppa says, can Joe Biden even get a security clearance now that all has been exposed with his laptop? Yeah, I'm sure he is no issues there. I don't see anything there that would would invalidate that. He's already been the vice president. He's already probably hyper security cleared. So I'm sure he's going to be okay. USA Libertarian, I feel like with no evidence, careless speech pattern is an indicator of narcissism. Yeah. Careless speech pattern is an indicator of narcissism. Interesting point there. Razian says, thank you for these streams. Found your channel after looking into the election shenanigans. Thanks, Razian. Thank you for being here. Appreciate you joining us. We're going to keep talking about it. So it will be ongoing. We have Mark Marquez who says, has Arizona been officially called for Biden by the state? So no, my understanding is no. And I actually think even CNN pulled it back off. So if you check the CNN call, Arizona is now gray. We have Alpha Fox Adam says, people fail to understand the idea that even indirect evidence is still evidence. Elia says, what would cause the election to be decided by the Supreme Court, and how do you think that they would vote? So the Supreme Court's not going to do that. They can't go in and say, we're going to vote for the next president. They don't have that power. That's not in their authority. But what they can do, and we talked about this a lot on Friday, is they can take the Pennsylvania court case and they can make a decision on that. So remember, in Pennsylvania, this is big. I'll do a quick synopsis on this. In Pennsylvania, a judge out of 4 judges, actually 4 to 3 out of Pennsylvania, changed the election deadline. It used to be on election night. It was set by the legislature, by the people, and the Constitution says the legislature sets governs the elections. It was set. Judges changed it. They moved it out 3 days. Remember this, on election night, Donald Trump was up in Pennsylvania. 3 days later, he was down. I don't know what number of votes came in after election night and before the 3-day extension deadline that the judges granted in Pennsylvania. But if there was in that batch of votes from election night plus 3 days, if there's enough in there to overturn the election, so if that stack of votes was invalidated, then Trump would win Pennsylvania. If that were the case, Judge Alito has come down on Pennsylvania and said, we want to take a look. You need to start segregating your ballots. So anything that came in after Election Day, you got to segment that out. And then he issued another order that said, I have heard that you're not doing that. This is a problem. Make sure you're doing it and get back to us. So my point is, if those votes from Pennsylvania plus 3 days, if those are all thrown out and Pennsylvania flips, that's a big deal. And the Supreme Court, in my opinion, they've indicated that they may actually go that route. So we will see, but they're not going to vote for the president. If they vote to invalidate those votes, it may effectively mean Donald Trump is going to be the president, but not because they're voting for him. All right. A big super chat from James Clark says, AG Barr authorized state attorney generals to launch a fraud investigation. So Barr has federal prosecutors looking into substantial evidence of tampering. We've got, that comes from Eddie Pizzle. We have Ryan McCuster says, love the show. What are your thoughts about Barr authorizing the Department of Justice to investigate any substantial allegations of voter fraud? Is this significant? Yeah, I think it's very significant. And I didn't even know that had happened yet. So that must have literally been happening right as we were going on the show. So I think that's interesting news. I think it's not a bad, not a bad development. I think, as long as it's done seriously, like if this is just a token investigation, it's going to be like the rest of it, but we will see. All right. So Dash E says, I was under the impression that judges cannot make the laws, only the legislature and people via petition. So yeah, you're right. The judges can't make the laws. That's why this Pennsylvania case is a big problem. If they just change the election laws because they wanted to, that's in violation of the Constitution, and the Supreme Court might smack them on the hand over that. All right. USA Libertarian says Trump could have taken it easily by doing anything. He fumbled COVID. He never ramped down his contentiousness. And yes, of course, the Dems cheated. So kind of a multivariate approach there. And I don't think you're far off. I think there are a lot of valid criticisms of the Trump campaign and the Trump presidency and the Trump administration for sure. Jim Schmidt says, what do you think will happen if they overturn the results of the election? I can't see them overturning just because they are concerned about the left throwing a temper tantrum. Yeah, so sort of that's kind of where this is going, right? If the country establishes that Joe Biden is the next president and they start transitioning and everybody starts acting that way, to reverse that would be catastrophic, right? People would just go, wait a minute, we've been living in this reality where Joe Biden is the president and now you're saying he's not? So it's going to feel, if the election is reversed, I'm not even saying that that is particularly the best thing for the country. Okay, I'm not even sure that that is ideal because of this, because of most of the country, I think, is moving on past this. And if it suddenly flips, if we go a month thinking that Joe Biden is the president and we wake up on December 14th and the electors vote for Donald Trump and everybody wakes up and they go, wait a minute, what? The left, everybody on that side of the aisle, they're going to be saying that this was stolen from us. So this legitimacy battle is not over if Donald Trump, secures the election, unless there's something that AG Barr finds, unless there's something that is really, really damning in terms of voter fraud that will tilt that scale. Because these simple allegations like, some postal service worker somewhere threw 100 ballots in a trash can, that is not sufficient. Most Americans are going to look at that and they're going to say, okay, fine. So what, right? Who cares? Even though we all should care, but that's the idea. It's not big enough to overturn an entire election in their minds. So AG Barr, whatever this investigation is, if he's going to find something, it better be big and it better be something that has some girth to it, that's going to hit Americans in the face and say, yeah, okay, that is significant. I am now awake. I'm now listening, and that is wrong. If it's less than that, even if it exists, it may not be persuasive enough to convince the American public that this change needs to be made or that it's legitimate. Good question, though. All right, what else? We have some other questions coming in. A lot of conversations. We have Jim Sullivan says the media is at fault by crowning Biden the ultimate champion. Any tantrum after a reversal is on them. Yeah, I think they're doing it for a very intentional reason so that it is difficult to reverse it. We have Pocket who says, according to the Gateway Pundit, Georgia might have as much as 132 ineligible votes due to red flags such as change of address. Elias says, is there voter fraud? If there is voter fraud, where do you think it is likely to come from? A bunch of fraudulent ballots or from system bugs or maybe a combo of the two? Good question. So I think that it's probably sort of a little bit of, to me, it seems more likely that somebody somewhere got their hands on ballots. I think this was probably done physically. That's just my guess. If I had to guess, I would guess that this was done physically. And the reason I say that is because physically versus digitally. Let me make that distinction. So rather than them going in and adjusting source software on these counting machines, I think to me that leaves a little bit too much of room for potential of being caught. Okay, if you can go in and you can analyze the source code on this stuff, unless you can go in, change it, and then go back in and change it back. If you could do that, then maybe the digital is more likely. But that's just, I'm just kind of hypothesizing. What I think sort of happened is that a lot of these groups really did their best to change the election rules at the last minute. So they all tried to push the election dates out. They were successful in some states. They were successful in North Carolina. They were successful in Pennsylvania, and they manipulated the election rules at the last minute in a number of different states in different ways and in a variety of different functions. And so if they did that, my hypothesis was that they did that for a reason, because they wanted to see what the final deadline was, what the final tally was on election night, and they needed additional time to go corral more votes to close the gap there. So I think that's probably what happened, is that they saw the difference. They had additional time, so they went and they corralled a bunch of votes. I don't know where, how that worked or what happened there specifically, but then as the election night was going on, then they were inserting those in sort of defined segments. So they would go through, they'd add, 1,000 ballots, 1,000 ballots, 1,000 ballots, 1,000 ballots at defined intervals at defined intervals. And they were just slowly sort of beefing up those numbers after they knew what they had to get to. And so I think that that's actually harder to find. Remember, we have a distributed election system by design. We wanted a lot of different elections and a lot of different counties and a lot of different things going on. So rather than changing the election software on the hardware that is more centralized, I think it makes more sense to just, put in some agents somewhere that have extra ballots that have been collected and are sort of justified in the election systems, and then just have those people go and insert those ballots into key counties where they'll flip the counties and they'll flip the states. I feel like that is really what's going on. And I think that's harder to catch, actually, which is why it's probably what's going on. Okay, so we have John Drake, who says, remember the 3rd of November election 2000 when we were told by the mainstream media Gore won, and 37 days later we got Bush. So I do remember that. I was a freshman in high school, but I do remember it. Don't remember a lot of the current events of that time because I was 15, 14. Wasn't that important to me. But I did read about Bush versus Gore in law school, and I don't know that we're there yet, but it is a possibility, so we will see. All right, Marine 2007 says, it would be funny to see legacy media collapse if Trump gets out of office. Pollsters' fate seems grim, miscalculating the blue wave. Yeah, the pollsters, I think that they were totally, wrong, but I don't know that their mission wasn't accomplished. I think they were technically wrong on the polls, but I think that their mission was not to be right on the polls. I think their mission was to help their clients feel good about their prospects and then condition people for a specific outcome. I think the polls are more less reflective and more prescriptive in a way. They actually are intended to do something, to cause a change in behavior rather than just reporting on the data. Zulu Zeit says, I predict that if proof is too conveniently conclusive, people will think fraud was perpetrated by Trump against himself in exactly the right way for him to prove it. Counter conspiracy. Whoa. Yeah. So I think that is true, right? It doesn't matter what happens with Trump. If AG Barr comes out and says, yeah, there's massive voter fraud everywhere, basically the exact reverse contingency is going to also disagree with the election. So let's say right now, it's about 50-50 in the country. We'll say it's 51%, 49% Biden for Trump if you believe the final numbers. If that flips, then the idea is the majority of the country actually supported Joe Biden. But is that the case? Okay. If the Republicans are accurate and there was fraud, and Republicans really do make up the majority of the country, then correcting the wrong would then put the impetus back on the Democrats, right? The Democrats would now be in the minority because presumably if the Republicans are right, if we believe the Republican premise, Joe Biden didn't actually win 74 million votes. It's actually significantly less than that. And so the Republicans would actually be in the majority if you took their premise that there was fraud in the election. All right, polls were there to prime the acceptance of the Biden win. That comes from JD. Barr has done nothing. Don't expect much. That comes from Pink Poodle. Yeah, that's kind of what I feel with Bill Barr. What's he going to do about it? Is this a token investigation or is he serious about this thing? We're going to find out pretty soon. We have Antonio E, who says, Research Hammer, Scorecard, Jen McCurney, Dennis Montgomery, Sidney Powell. Tell me if this is credible or not. Government program that interferes in election. Yeah, I'm going to write that one down. All right. So Andre Hustle says, what about the stimulus? Why did Polanski sign now? I don't know about that. I'm not sure who Polanski is or what that is about. Maybe Miss Faith can take a quick look at that and let me know what you're talking about. But thank you, Andre Hustle, for the super chat. Appreciate that. What about the stimulus? Has that been signed? Did that get signed while we were doing the show? I can't imagine that it did, right? This was a constant back and forth between the White House and the House of Representatives with Nancy Pelosi. A lot of back and forth. I think it was a political football. They were trying to kick it, between each other. And now I'm not sure that anything has happened on that. Starries Z says, do you agree that the Republicans likely keeping the Senate and the gaining 7 House seats is evidence that a Biden win would be suspicious? I do think that, right? I think that the idea was that there was going to be this big blue wave across the country, and there wasn't. In fact, there was kind of a red wave across the country. The Democrats lost seats in the House. The Senate is very close. I think that's still kind of up for grabs right now. And Joe Biden won. Everybody was out voting Republican. But Joe Biden won? That doesn't make any sense. And there's a lot of data saying that there were a lot of ballots that were just Joe Biden only, top of the ticket. When more people will vote for more than one person on their ballot, which is an interesting data point. I think big data is going to answer a lot of these questions. A data analysis, forensic analysis, because you can go through and you can, with a fine-tooth comb, unravel all of this, but it takes time. So the people who are out there saying that because they don't have really concrete evidence that this whole thing should just be invalidated and we should all just forget about it and move on with our lives, that's not right. There's a window of time for this purpose. We have courts, we have a constitutional system, we have the ability to file lawsuits and challenge these things for this reason. We have an electoral college for this purpose. So the idea that we all just need to sit down and shut up and just accept the results is ridiculous. Of course we can keep moving forward and having these conversations, and we intend to. All right. We have Kimberly Gabaldon, who says, what about the alleged watermarks? I've heard about that, and I've heard about some of the, the print dot patterns and those types of things. I just haven't seen any evidence of it yet. If there's evidence, we'll talk about it. All right. Miss Faith sent me a link, said Mitch McConnell is reportedly taking the lead on stimulus negotiations as the Trump administration sits out. Okay, so they're going to continue to move forward on that stuff. We have another question from Bugatti. He says, think about all the young people living back home right now whose parents made them fill out their mail-in ballots this year when they likely didn't care. Interesting. Yep. All right, says, so the clip from Faith says that Biden may jump into the negotiations over a new stimulus package in the coming weeks. USA Libertarian says, at a certain point, the dictator makes their corruption so glaringly obvious, daring you to speak up so they can put you on a dissident list. Oh, wait, that's kind of what they're doing, right? Didn't AOC say she wants to do that? And the Trump Accountability Project and all that stuff? It's ridiculous. We should be allowed to talk about these things. We should be allowed to have a conversation about this. If it's not good, if it's a bad idea, somebody can come out and refute all the points and we'll all be the wiser for it. But it's the only way that we're going to have this synthesis of sides. Okay. If the conversation is so critical, it doesn't matter what side you're on. Okay. If you are watching this and you're like, Rob is a Trump lunatic, right? He's all talking about conspiracy theories. That's all he's talking about. And this whole thing is just a joke. You can feel that way, but there are something like 70 million Americans who are going to watch this Biden presidency, and they're going to feel jaded. They're going to feel like they got taken advantage of, and this whole thing was illegitimate and a fraud. And if we can't communicate to those people that this was in fact a legitimate election, but we have to have a conversation about it. We have to talk it through and really flesh it out. If we just do what Jake Tapper says, or like Neil Cavuto does, and just says, there's no credible evidence, stop talking about it. Neil Cavuto says, shut off. We can't even hear from the press secretary. Cut her off. We have different stories of people just, getting censored and nobody's allowed to talk about it. What's going to happen if that is the playbook here, there's going to be a huge contingent of people who feel like they have not been heard, like they have not gotten their voice out, and they're going to be angry for years over that. So more conversation is safer. It's better for the country. If there really was no election fraud, I'll be the first to shout it from the rooftops and say, look, we went through the legal process. We did an investigation. We had a conversation about it. Everybody looked into it. There's nothing there. Or if it was inconsequential to this election. Let's move on. Button it up. Quit your complaining. Get out of the White House. Don't be a sore loser. This is how how our country works. Bye-bye. I'll be the first one to shout that from the rooftops. But we have to get there. We have to have that conversation in order to be able to bring those points back to the other side. We can't just shout at people and say, you're an idiot. You don't get to talk about this. And if you do, we're going to cancel your channel. We're going to throw you off Twitter. We're going to add you to a list. And now you are enemy number one. That is not a good way to run a country. And many, many people are going to be unhappy about it. So I want more conversation. We're going to keep playing around with these ideas, because I think through the conversation, we may come to some conclusions that are going to be more powerful. And the conversation is how we get there. So we have to have them in order to get there. All right. We've got Fox News has their angle, which is Biden until proven otherwise. That comes from John Noel. I think that's kind of how a lot of the people in the media are right now, which is not a bad thing, right? The odds are in Joe Biden's favor. I don't want anybody to think that this video is not in touch with reality, right? It's true. Donald Trump has an uphill battle, but the game isn't over yet, and he's got a lot of resources that are digging into these different states, and there's a lot of issues that we've covered on this channel enough so that it's worth having a conversation about. It's not like there is nothing that's going on. If there was nothing that was going on and there's no evidence at all, I'd have nothing to talk about. But there is, so we will keep talking about it. All right, Zulu's here. He says, the dictators have certainly been taking their time about it. The protracted coup I've heard of my entire adult life is no bueno. Boo Dems. So I think it's a big sarcastic comment there from Zulu. We have James High says, once you realize the bulk of Trump hate is not as contextual manipulation or false allegations, which no one dies from, Trump grows on you. Uncomfortable, but true. Yeah, I kind of had that same experience. I think certainly Donald Trump's abrasive. He's got a huge New York personality that many people don't resonate with. Doesn't bother me. I don't have an issue with it, but other people do. And I think that has been off-putting for a lot. All right. Trump has 1,000 enemies for every friend in government. That comes from Zorro. We have Dash E says, I don't know. I just started watching Fox recently. Maybe they're more just giving us the hard truth so we can be prepared than pretending like everything's okay. That may be the case. Yeah, I mean, you're seeing people in different media groups and different channels and different shows who are sort of like warming their audience up to it. You'll see them slowly start to sort of make a change. Well, maybe if Joe Biden is president, it wouldn't be that bad, and they're sort of warming them up to accept the reality, which is fair, right? They know their audience and they know how to handle those conversations. If on December 14th all the electors vote for Joe Biden, then that's it. Then the election is over and we can come back on here and say, okay, cool. Yeah. Due process was completed. All of the investigations took place. AG Barr, was poking around the whole country, didn't find anything. All right, great. We know our elections are good. We know our elections are safe. Now let's get back to business. Joe Biden's in the White House. Great. What does he want to do? Particularly, I want to know, what does he want to do with justice reform issues? How is he going to, how are his policies going to be better than Donald Trump's? I've had a lot of criticisms on his record because his record's pretty bad on the justice stuff, but we'll give him a fresh shot. We'll give him a fair shake in a new administration because we ultimately want to see progress. We want to see people come back to the table. I want the administration to be successful on the issues that are important to me and to our firm and to our clients in particular. And if they're going to be doing that, then great. Then we'll help them through. But the point is, we got to have legitimacy. We have to know that that's the president. That's the person. And if there is no legitimacy, if everybody keeps trying to not talk about this stuff and fake it until we make it, then there's going to be a huge part of the country that is very upset about it. And it's going to be difficult for this new government to function, even if it is a Joe Biden government. So Joe Biden and the Democrats and all these Jake Tappers and Neil Cavutos and all of these people in the media, they are doing themselves a disservice. Although they may be winning this message, ultimately, they're going to end up with half the country that is largely ungovernable. And that's a big problem. That's a big problem for America. It's a big problem for Joe Biden. And that's what we want to solve. And so by having these conversations, we're able to flesh through some of those issues in a little bit more detail. So let's leave it at that, everybody. It's been a long show on a new Monday on a fresh week. We're going to be back here again tomorrow to pick it up. So I'm not expecting that it's anything but election probably this week. If we have any other criminal justice news poking around, please send those stories to us or post them in our Discord server, which is the link is in the live stream chat, and the description is in, I think the link's in the description. So check that out, right? The Discord channel is a lot of fun, and there's some pretty cool people over there talking before and after the show. And we're here live every day this week. It's at 5 p.m. Arizona time, 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. We have these live chats. The videos go up everywhere after the show is over. We love having you a part of them because these questions are great and there is a lot to talk about. It's very important that we're talking about it. One thing I would ask is, if you're not already a subscriber, of course, subscribe. But if you are and you like what we do here, I'd love it if you would share the channel. A lot of this stuff is very provocative. And as we see, they're all trying to sort of limit how we can talk about these things. And we don't want that to happen. We want more conversations. We want deeper thought, more analysis, and it helps the channel grow and helps us carry that conversation on forward. So I want to thank you and ask you for that. And other than that, my friends, we'll see you tomorrow. Everybody have a wonderful evening and sleep well.